Lake Victoria is one of the African Great Lakes. The lake was named after Queen Victoria by the explorer John Hanning Speke, who was the first European to discover it. Speke accomplished this in 1858, while on an expedition with Richard Francis Burton to locate the source of the Nile River. With a surface area of 68,800 square kilometres, Lake Victoria is Africa's largest lake by area, and is also the largest tropical lake in the world. Lake Victoria is the world's second largest freshwater lake by surface area. Only Lake Superior in North America is larger. In terms of its volume, Lake Victoria is the world's ninth largest continental lake, and it contains about 2,750 cubic kilometers of water. Lake Victoria receives its water primarily from direct precipitation and thousands of small streams. The largest stream flowing into this lake is the Kagera River, the mouth of which lies on the lake's western shore. Lake Victoria is drained solely by the Nile River near Jinja, Uganda, on the lake's northern shore. Lake Victoria occupies a shallow depression in Africa and has a maximum depth of 84 am and an average depth of 40 am. Its catchment area covers 184,000 square kilometers. The lake has a shoreline of 4,828 km, with islands constituting 3.7% of this length, and is divided among three countries, Kenya, Uganda and Tanzania. Geology. Lake Victoria during its geological history, went through changes ranging from its present shallow depression, through to what may have been a series of much smaller lakes. Geological cores taken from its bottom show Lake Victoria has dried up completely at least 3 times since it formed. These drying cycles are probably related to past ice ages, which were times when precipitation declined globally. Lake Victoria last dried out 17,300 years ago, and it refilled beginning about 14,700 years ago. Geologically, Lake Victoria is relatively young about 400,000 years old and it formed when westward flowing rivers were dammed by an upthrown crustal block. This geological history probably contributed to the dramatic cyclid speciation that characterizes its ecology, as well as that of other African Great Lakes, although some researchers dispute this, arguing while Lake Victoria was at its lowest between 18,000 and 14,000 years ago, and it dried out at least once during that time, there is no evidence of remnant ponds or marshes persisting within the desiccated basin. If such features existed, then they would have been small, shallow, turbid, and/or saline, and therefore markedly different from the lake to which today's species are adapted. The shallowness of Lake Victoria, its limited river inflow, and its large surface area compared to its volume make it vulnerable to the effects of climate changes. Hydrology and limnology. Lake Victoria receives 80% of its water from direct precipitation. Average evaporation on the lake is between 2.0 and 2.2 meters per year, almost double the precipitation of riparian areas. In the Kenya sector, the main influent rivers are the Sayo, Nzoia, Yala, Nyando, Sundumaru, Magusi and the Migori. Combined, these rivers contribute far more water to the lake than does the largest single inflowing river, the Kagera River, which enters the lake from the west. The only outflow from Lake Victoria is the Nile River which exits the lake near Jinja, Uganda. In terms of contributed water, this makes Lake Victoria the principal source of the longest branch of the Nile, however, the most distal source of the Nile basin, and therefore the ultimate source of the Nile, is more often considered to be one of the tributary rivers of the Kagera River, and which originates in either Rwanda or Burundi. The uppermost section of the Nile is generally known as the Victoria Nile until it reaches Lake Albert. Although it is a part of the same river system known as the White Nile and is occasionally referred to as such, strictly speaking this name does not apply until after the river crosses the Uganda border into South Sudan to the north. The lake exhibits eutrophic conditions. In 1990–1991, oxygen concentrations in the mixed layer were higher than in 1960–1961, with nearly continuous oxygen supersaturation in surface waters. Oxygen concentrations in hypolymnetic waters were lower in 1990–1991 for a longer period than in 1960–1961, with values of less than 1 mg per liter occurring in water as shallow as 40 meters compared with the shallowest occurrence of greater than 50 meters in 1961. The changes in oxygenation are considered consistent with measurements of higher algal biomass and productivity. These changes have arisen for multiple reasons: successive burning within its basin, soot and ash from which has been deposited over the lake's wide area, from increased nutrient inflows via rivers, and from increased pollution associated with settlement along its shores. The extinction of cichlids in the genus Haplochromys has also been blamed on the lake's eutrophication. The fertility of tropical waters depends on the rate at which nutrients can be brought into solution. The influent rivers of Lake Victoria provide few nutrients to the lake in relation to its size. Because of this, most of Lake Victoria's nutrients are thought to be locked up in lake bottom deposits. By itself, this vegetative matter decays slowly. Animal flesh decays considerably faster, however, so the fertility of the lake is dependent on the rate at which these nutrients can be taken up by fish and other organisms. There is little doubt that Haplochromys played an important role in returning detritus and plankton back into solution. With some 80% of Haplochromys species feeding off detritus, and equally capable of feeding off one another, they represented a tight, internal recycling system, moving nutrients and biomass both vertically and horizontally through the water column, and even out of the lake via predation by humans and terrestrial animals. The removal of Haplochromys, however, may have contributed to the increasing frequency of algal blooms, which may in turn be responsible for mass fish kills. Fisheries. Lake Victoria supports Africa's largest inland fishery. Environmental issues. A number of environmental issues are associated with Lake Victoria. Fishing. The introduction of exotic fish species, especially the Nile perch, has altered the freshwater ecosystem of the lake and driven several hundred species of native cichlids to near or total extinction. Water hyacinth invasion. The water hyacinth has become a major invasive plant species in Lake Victoria. The release of large amounts of untreated wastewater, agricultural and industrial runoff directly into Lake Victoria over the past 30 years, has greatly increased the nutrient levels of nitrogen and phosphorus in the lake triggering massive growth of exotic water hyacinth, which colonized the lake in the late 1990s. Unregistered trademarks are This invasive weed creates anoxic conditions in the lake inhibiting decomposing plant material, raising toxicity and disease levels to both fish and people. At the same time the plant unregistered trademark SMAT or UAB creates a barrier for boats and ferries to maneuver, impedes access to the shoreline, interferes with hydroelectric power generation, and blocks the intake of water for industries. On the other hand, water hyacinth mats can potentially have a positive effect on fish life in that they create a barrier to overfishing and allow for fish growth. There has even been the reappearance of some fish species thought to have been extinct in recent years. However, the overall effects of the water hyacinth are still unknown. Growth of the water hyacinth in Lake Victoria has been tracked since 1993, reaching its maximum biomass in 1997 and then declining again by the end of 2001. Greater growth was observed in the northern part of the lake, in relatively protected areas, which may be linked to current and weather patterns and could also be due to the climate and water conditions, which are more suitable to the plant's growth. The invasive weed was first attempted to be controlled by hand, removed manually from the lake, however, regrowth occurred quickly. Public awareness exercises were also conducted. More recently, measures have been used such as the introduction of natural insect predators, including 2 different water hyacinth weevils and large harvesting and chopping boats, which seem to be much more effective in eliminating the water hyacinth. Other factors which may have contributed to the decline of the water hyacinth in Lake Victoria include varying weather patterns, such as El Niño during the last few months of 1997 and first 6 months of 1998, bringing with it higher levels of water in the lake and thus dislodging the plants. Heavy winds and rains along with their subsequent waves may have also damaged the plants during this same time frame. The plants may not have been destroyed, however, simply moved to another location. Additionally, the water quality and nutrient supply, temperature and other environmental factors could have played a role. Overall, the timing of decline could be linked to all of these factors, and perhaps together, in combination, they were more effective than any one deterrent would have been by itself. The water hyacinth is in remission, and this trend could be permanent if control efforts are continued. Pollution. Pollution of Lake Victoria is mainly due to discharge of raw sewage into the lake, dumping of domestic and industrial waste, and fertilizer and chemicals from farms. The Lake Victoria Basin is one of the most densely populated rural areas in the world. Its shores are dotted with cities and towns, including Kisumu, Busia, and Homa Bay in Kenya, Kampala, Jinja, and Entebbe in Uganda, and Bukoba, Mwanza and Musoma in Tanzania. These cities and towns also are home to many factories that discharge their waste directly into the lake and its influent rivers. These urban areas also discharge raw sewage into the river, increasing its eutrophication that in turn is helping to sustain the invasive water hyacinth. History and exploration. The first recorded information about Lake Victoria comes from Arab traders plying the inland routes in search of gold, ivory, other precious commodities, and slaves. An excellent map, known as the Illiteracy Map from the calligrapher who developed it and dated from the 1160s, clearly depicts an accurate representation of Lake Victoria, and attributes it as the source of the Nile. The lake was first sighted by a European in 1858 when the British explorer John Hanning Speke reached its southern shore while on his journey with Richard Francis Burton to explore Central Africa and locate the Great Lakes. Believing he had found the source of the Nile on seeing this vast expanse of open water for the first time, Speke named the lake after Queen Victoria. Burton, who had been recovering from illness at the time and resting further south on the shores of Lake Tanganyika, was outraged that Speke claimed to have proved his discovery to have been the true source of the Nile, which Burton regarded as still unsettled. A very public quarrel ensued, which not only sparked a great deal of intense debate within the scientific community of the day, but also much interest by other explorers keen to either confirm or refute Speke's discovery. In the past, the famous British explorer and missionary David Livingstone failed in his attempt to verify Speke's discovery, instead pushing too far west and entering the River Congo system instead. Ultimately, the Welsh-American explorer Henry Morton Stanley, on an expedition funded by the New York Herald newspaper, confirmed the truth of Speke's discovery, circumnavigating the lake and reporting the great outflow at Ripon Falls on the lake's northern shore. Nalubaale Dam. The only outflow for Lake Victoria is at Jinja, Uganda, where it forms the White Nile. The water 12,000 years ago drained over a natural rock weir. In 1952, British colonial engineers blasted out the weir and reservoir. A standard for mimicking the old rate of outflow called the agreed curve was established, setting the maximum flow rate at 300 to 1,700 cubic meters per second depending on the lake's water level. In 2002, Uganda completed a second hydroelectric complex in the area, the Kyaira Hydroelectric Power Station, with World Bank assistance. By 2006, the water levels in Lake Victoria had reached an 80-year low, and Daniel Cull, an independent hydrologist living in Nairobi, Kenya, calculated that Uganda was releasing about twice as much water as is allowed under the agreement, and was primarily responsible for recent drops in the lake's level. Transport. Since the 1900s, Lake Victoria ferries have been an important means of transport between Uganda, Tanzania and Kenya. The main ports on the lake are Kisumu, Mwanza, Bukoba, Entebbe, Port Bell and Jinja. Until Kenyan independence in 1963, the fastest and most modern ferry, MV Victoria, was designated a Royal Mail ship. In 1966, train ferry services between Kenya and Tanzania were established with the introduction of MV Uhuru and MV Umoja. The ferry MV Bukoba sank in the lake on May 21, 1996, with a loss of between 800 and 1,000 lives, making it one of Africa's worst maritime disasters. See also: Darwin's Nightmare, Kisanda. References. External links. Decreasing levels of Lake Victoria worry East African countries. Bibliography on water resources and international law. Peace Palace Library, New Scientist article on Uganda's violation of the agreed curve for hydroelectric water flow. Dams draining Lake Victoria, troubled waters, the coming calamity on Lake Victoria. Multimedia from clpmag.org, species list of Lake Victoria Basin. Cyclades of Lake Victoria and surrounding lakes. G.D. Hale Carpenter joined the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and took the D.M. in 1913 with a dissertation on the tsetse fly and African trypanosomiasis. He published, A Naturalist on Lake Victoria, with an account of sleeping sickness and the tsetse fly. T.F. Unwin Limited, London. Biodiversity Archive, http, www.youtube.com/watch V=V9VJ6CEZLNU, a beautiful video of Lake Victoria, Institutions of the East African Community, Lake Victoria Development Programme, Lake Victoria Fisheries Organisation.